one end of the string you have fixed to the rigid support, and to another end of the string you have fixed a ball which has certain weight. When the frictional limit is crossed, when the friction limit is breakdown, it itself will adjust to the applied force and it will allow the motion of the book in the forward direction. The maximum value of the static friction is called limiting friction, and rolling friction, a friction developed between the rolling body and the surface, is called rolling friction. Hello everyone, I am Nishma Nanjamma, Faculty of Physics in Vidyashram Pre-University College, the Temple of Excellence, Mysore. Welcome back to my session 4 on chapter 5, Laws of Motion. In the previous session, in the session 3, we discussed what you mean by law of conservation of linear momentum. That is, linear momentum before collision is equal to total linear momentum after collision. And also we discussed equilibrium of concurrent forces. We discussed what do you mean by concurrent forces. And in today's session, we shall discuss the common forces in mechanics. Common forces in mechanics and also friction. What are the different types of friction? What are the advantages and disadvantages of friction? That is, how friction is good and how friction is evil. And also we shall discuss the what do you mean by angle of friction. So to begin with, what are the common forces in mechanics? What are the common forces in mechanics? So we have studied what do you mean by mechanics? What do you mean by the terminology mechanics here? Mechanics is the study of physics which is concerned with the objects in motion. It is a branch of physics in which we study objects under motion. So there are common forces, few common forces which is responsible for the motion of the object. So first is weight, second is tension. Along with tension we also have spring force. We have spring force, and fourth we have contact force. We shall discuss these 4 common forces. We in the very first chapter in the physical world, chapter 1, we have discussed the 4 fundamental forces in nature. What are the 4 fundamental forces that we discussed? Like that they exist in nature. That is the gravitational force, electromagnetic force, strong nuclear force and weak nuclear force. Now in this chapter we are discussing common forces which are responsible for the, which relates to the motion of the object that comes in mechanics. The first, what do you mean by weight? What do you mean by weight? So weight is the downward force acting on a body due to gravitational pull. It is a downward force acting on an object due to gravitational pull. Suppose consider you have a table. You have a table and you have a ball located on the table. So the ball has some weight, right? So we can see there are 2 surfaces in contact. Ball is in contact with the surface of the table. There are 2 objects which are in mutual contact, and a ball has certain weight. Now what do you mean by weight? It is the downward force. It is the downward force acting on the object, that is the ball, due to gravitational pull. That is due to gravitational pull. So what is weight? The weight is nothing but the with which the object is pulled. With which the object is pulled. Weight is the downward force. It is the downward force acting due to gravity with which the body is pulled down. So then I have a question, whether weight and mass are similar entity, whether mass and weight are one and the same? No. How it is? No. Like mass remains same throughout, but weight, it changes from place to place. It changes from place to place due to the influence of gravity, So weight is measured as W is equal to mass into gravity, Say suppose the mass of a object is 6 kg. Mass is measured in terms of kg. The mass of the object, of certain object, is 6 kg. And I know what is the value of gravity. It is 9.8 meter per second square. That is the value of acceleration due to gravity. So when I multiply mass of the object into gravitational, that is gravitational value, gravity value, that is 9.8, I will get approximately 59 or 58 Newton. So weight is measured in terms of, you can see it is 58 Newton. So 58 Newton of force is required, the downward force with which the object is pulled down due to the influence of gravity. So this much of force is the downward force. This much amount of downward force is required with which the ball is pulled due to the influence of gravity. So weight is the force acting on a body. So it is the force, that means it is a downward force acting on a body. For example, ball, due to the influence of gravity near the surface. It is measured as a product of mass into gravity. Suppose the mass of the object is given in terms of kg, multiplied by the gravitational value, gravity of earth, gives you how much weight, how much force is required to pull down the object due to the influence of gravity. So this is about weight. So next you have tension. What do you mean by tension? Tension is a force exerted by a spring. Tension is a force exerted by a spring which is opposite to the direction of weight. To be more specific, consider you have a string. Is fixed to a rigid support. A string is fixed to a rigid support, and to another end of the string you have put a object which has weight W is equal to mg, which has certain weight. So this is the object. So consider you have taken a string. One end of the string is fixed to the rigid support, and this is your string. So another end you have put some load, you have put some weight. That is, weight is nothing but measured in terms of W is equal to m into g. You have put some weight. Now as you put the weight, the string gets stretched. The tension is developed in the string, which is an opposite force. This is the tension force. This is the tension which is acting opposite to the weight of the object. Consider you have a string. One end of the string you have fixed to the rigid support, and to another end of the string you have fixed a ball which has certain weight. When the string is stretched, the string tightens. The tension is developed in the string which acts in opposite direction to the applied weight, which acts in opposite direction to the external force applied. So this is a tension force. So tension is the force exerted by a spring, or to be more specific, you can consider a string. As you apply a force, a heavy object to one end of the string gets tightened. That means tension forces develop which is opposite to the external force applied, or the weight of the object, which is opposite to the direction of weight. So tension acts in opposite direction. This is your weight. So next you have something called spring force. You study tension. Similar to tension, we have another entity called spring force. So what is spring force then? Consider you have a spring which is fixed to the rigid support. If suppose this is your string, it is fixed to the rigid support. So when the spring is compressed, now this is compressed, the string is compressed, and also we'll see another case where the string is stretched, You have a spring which is connected to the rigid support, and another end of the spring is set free. So when the spring it is compressed, it looks like this, and when the spring is stretched, it looks like this. So we have not added any load. So I'll add any load called which has weight W is equal to mg. For example, I will add a brick. I will add a small brick. So what happened? My spring is elongated, and I will stretch the spring. So what happens that time? A restoring force is developed in the spring. A restoring force is developed in the RF. Restoring force is developed in the spring which acts in opposite direction to the applied external force which will try to bring back the spring to its original position. It is a stretched restoring force is developed in opposite direction which will try to bring back the spring to the original position. When it is stretched by the help of applying some load that is W is equal to mg, when it is stretched, equal and opposite force is developed. That is the restoring force which will try to bring back the spring to the original condition, to the original state. F applied force is proportional to minus of x is the displacement. So more force you apply, more will be the displacement. Heavy weight object you put to the another end of the spring, more will be the elongation of the spring. So less force you apply, less will be the elongation. So when it is stretched or compressed, what will happen? A restoring force will be developed which will be opposite in direction to the applied force, that is the weight of the object. That's why you have a negative sign. To remove the proportionality constant, I will add a k which is constant of proportionality. So minus kx, minus because restoring force is acting opposite direction to the weight applied or the external force. So F is equal to minus kx. X is the displacement and what is k? What is k? It is the spring constant. It is the spring constant. What is k? It is the spring constant. So force is proportional to the negative of the displacement of the spring. So to remove the proportionality constant, I will add k which is constant of proportionality. F is equal to minus kx. K is nothing but the spring constant. X is the displacement. So this is about the spring force. Next you have something called contact force. You have something called contact force. What do you mean by contact force? The name itself says contact. Contact of an object arises due to its contact with some other object. Contact force. Contact force of an object arises due to its contact with some other object. So you need two objects. You can see the example of the ball and a table here. The two surfaces are in contact. The two objects are in contact. So contact forces developed. Contact forces developed. So contact force, when one object, when the ball is on other object, that is on table, what happens? The molecules of the object exert force on each other. This molecular force developed is called contact force. In simple, it is simple, nothing but you have two objects, say table and the ball. The two surfaces of the objects are in contact. So when two surfaces of the object, when the surface of the ball and surface of the table are in contact, a contact force is developed. This is called contact force. So, and the weight is acting downward, that is W is equal to mg, the downward pull of the object due to the influence of gravity. A component force acting along normal to the surface is called normal reaction, which is given by a symbol N, or few textbooks use the symbol capital R. So I am taking normal reaction as N. The component of contact force. What is contact force? When the two surfaces are in contact with each other, a force developed is called contact force. So the component of contact force which is along to the normal of the surface is called normal reaction, which is acting opposite to the weight applied, which is acting opposite to the downward force W is equal to mg, which is acting perpendicular to the surface of the table. And I have the component of contact force which is acting parallel to the surface, is called friction, given by F, given by symbol F. A component of contact force along to the normal of the surface of the table is called normal reaction. A component of contact force which is parallel to the surface is called friction, which is given by symbol F, So when the force is applied in the forward direction equal to opposite to the direction of force, friction is acting parallel to the surface of the table or surface of the object. So what is weight? Weight is equal to mass into gravity. Mass is given, multiplied with gravity gives you what is the how much amount of the downward force is applied in order to pull the object due to the influence of gravity. So we got to know mass and weight are not same entity, they are different. Next we studied tension. If we consider a string, one end is fixed and to another end I am adding a object which has certain weight. I am applying external force to the another end of the spring. So what happens? The spring gets tightened. It is tension is developed in the spring. Tension is developed in the spring which acts opposite to the applied external force or the weight acts in the opposite direction. This is called tension force. When it comes to spring, I consider a spring. So a spring is compressed or it is elongated by adding certain amount of load or weight. So when I add weight, when I add that external force, the spring is elongated. When it is elongated, a restoring force is developed in the spring which will try to bring back the spring to its original position. So the restoring force which is developed is acting in opposite direction to the external force applied here. So I got to know F is equal to minus xk is the spring force. And I got to know what is contact force. If you have two objects, the contact force arises when it is with contact with the other object. When the two surfaces interact, when the two surfaces of the object interacts, a force is developed known as contact force. A component of contact force along the normal to the surface is called normal reaction given by N, and the component of contact force which is parallel to the given surface is called friction. Friction acts equal and opposite to the applied force. So this is about the common forces in mechanics. Mechanics is a study of physics which concerned with the motion of the object's motion. Next I have friction. It is very important to understand what is friction. So friction is a boon as well as it is a curse. How it is a boon and how it is a curse we'll study in today's session. So what do you mean by friction? Friction is a force that arises. It is a force that arises when the surface of two bodies in contact or when they move or tend to move relative to each other. You can see this image. When the two surfaces, this is the ground and this is the table. This is the ground and this is the table. When two bodies are in contact or when the boy pushes the brick or the table in this direction and the opposite direction, friction is developed. When they move or tend to move, a friction is developed, a force is developed with respect to each other. That is called as friction. You can see a few images of which explains the friction here. Consider we have four types of friction: static friction, kinetic friction, limiting friction, rolling friction. We'll first try to understand what is friction and then explain each of the friction one by one. So consider friction. I have a rough horizontal surface. This is my horizontal surface. This is called vertical. So I have a rough horizontal surface. For example, it may be plane or it may be table, etc. It is a rough, not smooth surface. It is a rough horizontal surface. This is a rough horizontal surface and I have placed a book. On the horizontal surface, HS. Horizontal surface, I have placed a book. So what happens now? A book has some certain weight, right? A book has certain weight. So due to the weight of the book, a downward force acts. A downward force of the object. Downward force is acting on the object due to the influence of gravity. I'll take that as nothing but mass into gravity. That gives the weight. Mass into gravity. Book has certain weight. So there is a downward pull. Downward force acting on the object due to the influence of gravity. Equal and opposite to the downward force, I have a normal reaction N. Equal and opposite to the downward force, I have a normal reaction N, which is perpendicular to the contact force, which is perpendicular to the horizontal surface. Now you can see horizontal surface, that is the rough surface I have taken, is in contact with the surface of the book. Now what I'll do, I'll apply a force F. I will apply a force F in the forward direction towards the right. I'll apply a force. You can observe one thing here. When I apply force, the book will not move. The book will not move. It is at rest. I will increase the force. I will increase the force. But still, the object, that's the book, is not moving. It is still at rest. Why is this? Why is this? Because there is an equal and opposite force, that is friction. That is friction acting opposite to the applied force. It is due to friction that object is still at rest even though you apply certain force, it is not moving, because to the force you applied, you have the equal and opposite force acting in the opposite direction, that is friction. That is why the book is not moving. So what I have done, I have considered a horizontal rough surface, and to the surface of the plane or horizontal surface, and to the surface I have placed a book. So the two surfaces are in contact with each other. So you have reaction and action. That means by Newton's third law. It is satisfied. So when the two surfaces are in contact, there is a contact force. So component of contact force along normal to the surface is acting in opposite direction to the downward force. The book has certain weight, the book has certain weight, so there is a downward force which is acting due to the influence of gravity on the object. So now I apply certain force on the book to move in the forward direction. The book is at rest, it's not moving. I will increase the force. Even then the book is not moving because of the friction which is acting equal and opposite to the direction of applied force. Now what happened? Increase the force, friction will get increased. Even increase the force, the friction will increase. But there is certain limit called frictional limit, There is certain limit called friction limit, or we call it as a maximum point of the friction. There is a limitation, certain limit of the friction beyond which the object will move. There will be motion of the object, motion of the book will be seen. So increase in the applied force, the friction will increase. So there is certain limit called frictional limit beyond which it allows the motion of the object. So beyond which it allows the motion of the object. That increase in the force, it opposes the frictional force. So when this maximum limit of the friction is reached, when the frictional limit is reached, it is called the adjustable friction. Why it is called so? The friction, it increase in force, the friction will increase. Increase in force, the friction will increase. After certain breakdown, that is the certain breakdown of friction, certain limitation, the friction itself will adjust to the applied force. When the frictional limit is crossed, when the friction limit is breakdown, it itself will adjust to the applied force and it will allow the motion of the book in the forward direction. So that is why it is called adjustable force. It itself adjusts to the force applied after it breaks down its certain limit. So this is about friction. So it is the force that arises between the surface of two bodies in contact, or they move or tend to move relative to each other. If you push the block in this direction, the friction will act opposite to the direction in which you have applied the force. Force is what? Push or pull. So when you push the object in this side, the friction will act opposite to the force applied. It will oppose the motion of the block. Until a frictional limit is reached. When the frictional limit is reached, when it itself will adjust to the force applied and allows the motion of the object or allows the motion of the block. That is why we consider rough surface. If you have smooth surface, there will be no friction. You may slide, you may slip, or you may fall down. That's why there is a grip given under your shoe. So this is about friction. There are 4 types. The first one we'll discuss, it is static friction. I already explained here static friction. Static means what? What do you mean by static friction here? Given by Fs. Friction is denoted by F, static friction, Fs. Static means rest. Static means rest. It is the friction between two bodies when external force is applied but body is at rest. So static means what? Static means at rest. So you can consider denoted by Fs. So when two bodies are in contact, they oppose the relative motion or the tendency of relative motion of two objects in contact, of two bodies in contact. They oppose the relative motion of each other. When two bodies are in contact, they are at rest. Even though you apply force, there is a friction force acting equal and opposite to the applied force. The objects are not moving. They are at rest. So that type of friction is called static friction. Then what do you mean by the second, kinetic friction? Given by Fk, kinetic friction. When I tell kinetic friction, it talks about the motion of the object. Static talks about the rest and kinetic talks about the motion of the object. The friction that arises between two bodies when body is set into motion. When body is set into motion. Consider the kinetic friction talks about the motion of the body or motion of the object. When two bodies are in contact, they oppose the relative motion. They will slightly slide or move with respect to each other. That is called kinetic motion. The body is set into motion. This is called kinetic friction. In static friction, when two bodies are in contact, when you apply force, they are at rest. They are not moving. In kinetic friction, when two bodies are in contact, they slightly slide over each other, slightly move. They are set into motion. That is called kinetic friction. You can see a few images of which explains the friction. Few images that explain the friction. So next, you have limiting friction, which is given by Fs max. This symbol will explain you what do you mean by limiting friction. So, what do you mean by limiting friction? When magnitude of external force is increased, when the external force, if it is 10 Newton, when it is increased to 11, 12 Newton, the magnitude of static friction also increases and reaches maximum value. This maximum value of static friction is known as limiting friction. Static friction is given by Fs. So, maximum value of static friction is known as limiting friction. Hence, Fs max denotes limiting friction. When two bodies are in contact with each other, they will oppose the relative motion or tendency of relative motion between two bodies in contact. When two bodies are in contact, even though you increase the force, they are at rest. That is called static friction. A friction developed is called static friction. The maximum value of that static friction is called limiting friction, given by Fs max. So next you have rolling friction. The fourth type of friction called rolling friction. Name itself suggests you the friction between the rolling body and the surface. The friction between the rolling body and the surface is known as rolling friction. For example, consider tires, horse cart tires. Consider bicycle tires or horse cart tires. So, tires, when they roll, they roll with the surface of the road. So, the two objects are in contact. The tire is rolling on the surface of the road. The friction developed between the rolling body and the surface, the friction developed there is called rolling friction. Rolling friction is better compared to kinetic and static friction because the point of contact is less. So, rolling friction is much better than the kinetic and static friction because of this reason. When the tires is in rolling over the surface of the road, the friction developed is called rolling friction. So, we studied 4 types of friction. We got to know friction acts in equal and opposite direction to the applied force. It acts in equal and opposite direction to the applied force, and it opposes the relative motion, tendency of relative motion between two bodies in contact, and friction is a self-adjustable force, when it reaches certain maximum limit called frictional limit. Friction is itself will adjust to the applied force and allow the motion of the object. So if you apply certain force equal and opposite to the applied force, the friction will resist the motion of the object. When the maximum point is reached, that is the limiting friction point is reached, itself adjusts to the applied force and allows the motion of the object. And then we studied the four forces. Static, which talks about the rest, when two bodies are in contact, they remain at rest. So the friction developed is called static friction, given by Fs. Kinetic friction talks about the motion of the object. When two bodies are in contact, they slightly slide or move over each other. That is called kinetic friction. So what is limiting friction? The maximum value of the static friction is called limiting friction. And rolling friction, a friction developed between the rolling body and the surface, is called rolling friction. So you can see few of the images which tell you what do you mean by rolling friction, what do you mean by rolling friction, what do you mean by limiting and static frictions. So next we will discuss angle of friction. Angle of friction. What is the angle of friction? It is the angle between the normal reaction and the resultant of limiting friction and normal friction is called angle of friction. For example, consider a horizontal surface. Consider a horizontal surface. An object is placed on the horizontal surface. Applied force is in the forward direction, equal and in opposite to the applied force. There is a friction acting, that is the limiting friction. A limiting friction is acting in the opposite direction to the applied force from O to A. This is the limiting friction acting in the opposite direction. And there is due to the weight of the object placed on the horizontal surface, due to the weight of the object, you have a downward force acting on the object due to the influence of gravity, given by W is equal to M into G. Equal and opposite to the downward force, there is a normal reaction acting, that is N, given by a line OS. Normal reaction which is acting perpendicular to the horizontal surface. So this is the angle theta. So this gives you the resultant. This is represented by R. This gives you the resultant. So this OM gives you the resultant. The resultant is between the normal reaction. The resultant of the limiting friction and normal friction is the angle of friction. So the resultant of the limiting friction and the normal friction is making an angle theta. It is called angle of friction. So if you consider this triangle, that is triangle OMS. If you consider triangle OMS, so tan theta, if I take slope, tan theta is equal to MS by OS. It is MS by OS. What is MS? OA. It is parallel to OA. MS is parallel to OA. That is nothing but maximum static friction, that is limiting friction, divided by what is OS? It is the normal reaction given by N. So this is tan theta. So Fs by N is nothing but mu. Here the static friction is given by Fs. This Fs is proportional to N. This static friction is proportional to normal reaction N. If I remove the static friction, I will add a proportionality constant mu Sn. This is a proportionality constant called coefficient of static friction. This is the coefficient of static friction. This is the coefficient of static friction. So static friction is proportional to normal reaction n. To remove the proportionality symbol, I will add a constant of proportionality constant mu s. So this is mu s is nothing but coefficient of static friction. If I want coefficient, then mu s is equal to Fs by n. Fs by n. Fs by n. If I want coefficient, then it is mu s is equal to Fs by n. Similarly, you have tan theta is equal to limiting friction by n. I can write it as mu s. Limiting friction is maximum value of static friction. So Fs by n, in general F by n is nothing but mu. So Fs by n is nothing but mu s. So tan theta is equal to mu s. Theta is equal to tan inverse of mu s. So this is angle of friction. So this gives you the angle of friction. This is the angle of friction. Resultant of limiting friction and the normal reaction is called the angle of friction. So this is the equation for angle of friction. We got to know Fs is proportional to n. To remove the proportionality, I added a constant of proportionality, that is nothing but coefficient of static friction, mu s n. So if I want mu s, then F by n is equal to mu s. Coefficient of static friction is equal to F by n. So on simplification, I have angle of friction. In case of kinetic friction, I have Fk is proportional to normal reaction n. To remove the proportional symbol, I will add the constant of proportionality, that is nothing but mu k. This mu k is coefficient of kinetic friction into normal reaction. If I want coefficient of kinetic friction, then it will be Fk by n. So this is the equation to get coefficient of kinetic friction and coefficient of static friction. So on simplification, you have got angle of friction. Next, we have advantage of friction. Whenever we have advantage, we will also have disadvantage. We'll come to that. First, we'll study advantage of friction. What is the first advantage? Friction enables us to walk on the ground. Friction enables us to walk on the ground. So there is a contact between the foot and the ground, because of which we are able to walk. That is due to friction. We are able to walk because of the friction. Consider a scenario where you have a heavy rain and you have a slippery area. You have a slippery area. So when you walk on the slippery area, what happens? You will slip or you will fall down because there is no friction there. So in order, if there is a slippery area, what you will do? You will put some sand or you put some stones and make the area, make the place rough, so you can walk easily. There will be a rough surface where there will be friction and you will not slip or fall down. Similarly, consider a slide. You will be able to see in the kids section. There will be a slide. Slide will be a smooth surface where there will be no friction. If you walk on the slide, what happens? You will slip or you will fall down because of absence of friction. When you have rough surface, that means there is friction. That is why you are able to walk. When your foot is in contact with the ground, because of the friction, you are able to walk. That is the advantage of friction. Friction enables us to walk on the ground. Friction enables us to drive vehicle. Friction enables us to drive vehicle. Friction helps to hold object. You can see friction helps to hold object. Writing on paper or on board is possible due to friction. So due to friction. And brakes in the vehicle work on the principle of friction. You apply brake, a sudden brake in the vehicle, that work on the principle of friction. The gears in the vehicle work on the principle of friction. So friction helps us to hold object. Friction enables us to walk on the road or on the ground. Friction enables us to drive vehicle, and writing on the paper or on the board is possible due to friction. When these are the advantages of friction, we have disadvantages of friction here. First disadvantage is friction causes wear and tear of machine parts. Wear and tear of machine parts. That means efficiency of the machine is brought down. The efficiency of the machine reduces when the energy is lost in the form of heat. When an energy is lost in the form of heat, efficiency of the machine will reduce. So friction causes wear and tear of machine. Certain movable parts like motors, accumulators, etc. break down due to friction. Easy movement of the parts of the vehicle is not possible. When it is not possible, there will be damage in the parts of the machine, that is due to friction. So energy is wasted in the form of heat due to friction. That is why the efficiency of the machine is brought down. There is a wear and tear of the machine. The energy spent to overcome friction, between various parts of the machine is converted into heat. Thus, the machine parts are heated, and this may cause the damage of the machine. Even most of the movable parts like rotors or accumulators, the easy movement of the parts of the machine is not possible due to friction. There is no easy movements of the parts of the machine. That is why, because of friction, there is a damage in the parts of the machine. So there is wear and tear of the machine part. These are the disadvantage. How to overcome this friction? How will you reduce this friction? So making the surface smooth. How? By polishing them. If we make the surface smooth by polishing them, there will be no friction. As similar to the example that I said about the slide. Slide will be smooth, so there will be no friction. When there is no friction, you will slide, you will slip, you will fall down. So by polishing them, making the surface smooth, you can reduce friction. So use of lubricants, like use of grease to the brakes or other parts of the machine, you can see use of the lubricants in the machine part, so that it will reduce the friction. Next, use of ball bearings or roller bearings, that is use of ball bearings or roller bearings, you can reduce the friction. So use of anti-friction metals such as steel or other alloys to make machine parts. To make machine parts, you can use anti-friction metals or such as steels and other alloys, so you can reduce the friction. Now we have seen the advantage of friction. It enables us to walk, it enables us to hold pen objects, it enables us to write on the board, it enables us to drive the vehicle. So how many advantages we have in friction? Similarly, we have seen the disadvantage. Efficiency of the machine is lost due to energy is lost in the form of heat, and due to easy movement of parts of the machine is not possible due to friction. So there is disadvantage also. So friction is a boon and also it is a curse. Friction is a boon and also it is a curse. It is good as well as evil. So in the examination, you will get the question where you have to explain how friction is good and how friction is evil. So you can explain the advantages as well as disadvantages that friction has, and how you overcome this friction, how you reduce this friction by polishing them to create a smooth surface, by using lubricants, by using anti-friction metals such as steels and alloys to build the parts of the machine, to make the parts of the machine. So that's all for today's session. In today's session, we studied what is friction and what are the common forces in mechanics, friction, and also the type of friction: static friction, kinetic friction, that is limiting friction, and rolling friction. With the types of friction, I also studied advantages of friction as well as disadvantages of friction, how you overcome or reduce this friction. So that's all for today's session. Next, I'll come up with more interesting session on laws of motion, where we will study the banked road. What do you mean by banking of roads in the next upcoming session? Until then, take care. Have a good day. Thank you.